Pack your bags and get out. Asterisk. My daughter screamed at me when I refused to scrub her mother-in-law's bathroom for the third time that week. I quietly gathered my things and left. But what happened next shocked everyone, including the lawyers who called me 6 months later with news that changed everything. Follow my story until the end, and comment what country you're watching from so I can see how far this message of dignity has traveled. I'm Catherine Miller, and at 70 years old, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought moving in with my daughter after my husband's death would bring us closer together. I thought helping with her household and being a loving grandmother to my twin grandsons would be appreciated. I was wrong. Dead wrong about everything. Let me take you back to the beginning, to understand how a loving mother-daughter relationship can be poisoned by greed, manipulation, and the kind of evil that wears designer clothes and speaks in polite society tones. It was 18 months ago when my world first cracked apart. Harold, my husband of 47 years, collapsed in our garden while tending to his prized roses. One moment he was laughing about something our neighbor had said, the next he was gone. Massive heart attack, the doctors said. No warning, no time for goodbyes, no chance to tell him one last time how much he meant to me. Harold had been my anchor, my best friend, my partner in everything. We'd built a beautiful life together in our modest but comfortable home in Portland. He'd worked as a high school principal for 30 years, and I'd been an elementary school teacher. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were rich in the ways that mattered. We had each other, we had our daughter Rebecca, and when she gave us Tyler and Jake, our twin grandsons, our happiness felt complete. After the funeral, the loneliness hit me like a physical force. Our house, which had always felt warm and alive with Harold's presence, became a museum of memories that hurt too much to face every day. I'd find myself setting 2 place settings for dinner, then staring at his empty chair until the food went cold. I'd wake up reaching for him in our bed, only to find cold sheets and the devastating reality that he was never coming home. That's when Rebecca stepped in with what seemed like a perfect solution. "Mom," she said during one of her visits, finding me crying over a photo album in the living room, "you can't go on like this. Why don't you come stay with us in Seattle? The boys would love having their grandmother around more, and honestly, I could use the help with everything." At the time, it felt like a lifeline. Rebecca had always been a loving daughter, though our relationship had grown more distant since she'd married Marcus 5 years earlier. Still, the thought of being useful again, of being surrounded by family instead of ghosts, was exactly what my broken heart needed. "Are you sure Marcus would be okay with that?" I asked. I'd always sensed that my son-in-law merely tolerated me, though he was always polite enough during our visits. "Of course," Rebecca assured me. "You're family, Mom. Besides, you helped us with the down payment on the house. It's as much yours as ours." That was true. When Harold and I had received a substantial life insurance payout after his brother died, we'd given Rebecca and Marcus $150,000 to help them buy their dream home in one of Seattle's nicer suburbs. We'd wanted to help our daughter and her family get established, especially with the twins starting school. It had been Harold's idea, actually. "Let's help them while we're alive to see them enjoy it," he'd said. So I sold most of our furniture, packed up my most precious belongings, and moved the 173 miles from Portland to Seattle to start what I hoped would be a new chapter of my life. The house was everything Rebecca had described: a beautiful 2-story colonial with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a backyard perfect for the boys to play in. My room was on the first floor, a converted den with its own small bathroom, which Rebecca had decorated with some of my favorite things from the Portland house. For the first few weeks, it felt like a healing balm. I threw myself into being useful. I cooked dinner every night, helped the boys with their homework, did laundry, cleaned the house from top to bottom. Tyler and Jake, 8 years old and full of energy, brought joy back into my days. They'd race to hug me when they came home from school, compete to tell me about their day, and beg me to read them bedtime stories, just like I used to do with Rebecca. Rebecca seemed genuinely grateful for my help. "Mom, I don't know how I managed without you," she'd say as I presented another home-cooked meal or helped Tyler with his math homework. Marcus was cordial, if not warm, but I attributed that to his naturally reserved personality. But then Vivian Thornfield entered the picture. I should have seen the warning signs from our very first meeting. It was a Sunday afternoon in early November, about 6 weeks after I'd moved in. Rebecca had been nervous all morning, cleaning things that were already clean and constantly checking her appearance. Vivian likes things to be perfect, she explained when I asked about her unusual behavior. She has very high standards. Who's Vivian? I asked, though I was starting to suspect. Marcus's mother. She's coming for Sunday dinner. That's when I learned that Vivian Thornfield wasn't just any mother-in-law. She was Seattle royalty, the widow of tech mogul Richard Thornfield, who'd made his fortune in the early days of Microsoft and Amazon. The Thornfield name was on hospital wings and museum plaques throughout the city. Vivian sat on the boards of the Symphony, the Art Museum, and half a dozen charitable organizations. She lived in a mansion in the exclusive Laurelhurst neighborhood and had opinions about everything from wine to wallpaper. When she swept through the front door that Sunday, I understood immediately why Rebecca had been so nervous. Vivian Thornfield was 72 years old but looked a decade younger, thanks to what I suspected was excellent cosmetic surgery and a personal trainer. She was tall, elegant, with silver hair styled in a perfect chignon, and wearing what I later learned was a $3,000 Chanel suit. Everything about her screamed money and authority. Marcus, darling, she said, kissing her son on both cheeks in a way that seemed more European affectation than genuine affection. And Rebecca, how lovely you look. Then her pale blue eyes landed on me, standing in the kitchen doorway with an apron over my Sunday dress. And you must be Catherine, she said, her voice carrying the kind of polite disinterest usually reserved for service staff. How? Nice to finally meet you. The pause before nice spoke volumes. Dinner was an education in subtle warfare. Vivian dominated the conversation with stories about her various social commitments, dropping names of politicians and celebrities like breadcrumbs. She asked pointed questions about the house's maintenance, the children's education, and the family's financial planning. Throughout the meal, she treated me like I was invisible, directing all her comments to Marcus and Rebecca as if I were a piece of furniture that happened to be sitting at the table. When I mentioned that I'd been an elementary school teacher for 30 years, she said, "How admirable," in a tone that suggested it was anything but. When Tyler proudly told her that I helped him with his homework every day, she replied, "I'm sure your grandmother means well, but you really should be working with a proper tutor if you want to get into the right schools." By the time she left, I felt like I'd been systematically diminished and dismissed. But what worried me more was watching Rebecca throughout the evening. My confident, independent daughter had been transformed into someone I barely recognized. Nervous, deferential, constantly seeking Vivian's approval like a student hoping for a good grade. "Mom," Rebecca said to me quietly as we cleaned up the dishes after Vivian left, "maybe next time you could. I don't know, let Marcus and me handle most of the conversation. Vivian can be a little particular about social dynamics." Social dynamics. As if my presence at my own daughter's dinner table was some kind of social faux pas. "Rebecca," I said gently, "this is my home too now. I should be able to speak freely at dinner." She sighed, looking older than her 45 years. "It's just, Marcus's family is very traditional about certain things. And Vivian has a lot of influence over our financial situation." That was the first hint I got about what was really going on. Over the following weeks, I began to piece together the truth about my daughter's marriage and her relationship with her mother-in-law. Marcus, despite his family's wealth, had been largely cut off from the Thornfield fortune due to what Vivian considered his impractical choice to become a college professor instead of joining the family business empire. He taught American history at the University of Washington, a respectable but modestly paying job that couldn't support the lifestyle Rebecca had grown accustomed to during their courtship, when Vivian had been more generous with her financial support. Now Vivian controlled the purse strings with an iron fist. She paid for the boys' private school tuition, their health insurance, and provided a monthly allowance that supplemented Marcus's professor's salary. In exchange, she expected complete deference to her wishes about everything from how the house was decorated to how the children were raised. And increasingly, she had opinions about me. It started small, Comments about how crowded the house felt with 3 generations living together. Suggestions that perhaps I would be more comfortable in a senior living community where I could socialize with people my own age. Pointed observations about how my presence was disrupting the family's established routines. Rebecca began relay these comments to me, always framed as helpful suggestions rather than demands. Vivian thinks it might be good for you to get out more, meet other seniors. Vivian mentioned that having different generations in one house can be challenging for everyone involved. Vivian knows of some lovely assisted living places that might be perfect for someone in your situation. My situation. As if being a widow seeking comfort with her family was some kind of burden that needed to be managed. But it was the cleaning that became the real battleground. It started with Vivian's monthly visits, which she referred to as, quote, checking in on the family. During these visits, she would walk through the house like a general, inspecting troops, running her fingers along surfaces, checking corners for dust, examining the children's rooms for proper organization. Catherine, she said during her December visit, finding a water spot on the bathroom mirror that I had somehow missed. Attention to detail is so important in maintaining a proper household. I'm sure you understand. I bit my tongue and re-cleaned the mirror. In January, she found fault with the way I'd folded the towels in the linen closet. There's a right way and a wrong way to do everything, she informed me, refolding my work with practiced efficiency. Presentation matters. By February, her monthly inspections had become weekly visits, and nothing I did was ever good enough. The vacuum lines in the carpet weren't straight enough. The kitchen counters weren't properly sanitized. The boys' rooms weren't organized according to her exacting standards. Perhaps, she said to Rebecca during one particularly humiliating inspection, your mother needs more specific guidance about maintaining the household standards appropriate for a family in your position. Your position, as if I were somehow bringing down the family's social status by my very presence. Rebecca, to her eternal shame, began giving me lists, actual written lists of cleaning tasks, with detailed instructions about how each should be completed. Mom, I know this seems silly, but Vivian has very specific expectations, and it's just easier if we do things her way. Easier for whom? I asked, staring at a 3-page document that outlined the proper procedure for cleaning a toilet. For all of us, Rebecca replied, but she couldn't meet my eyes when she said it. That's when I realized what was happening. I wasn't a cherished family member being welcomed into my daughter's home. I was unpaid domestic help, expected to maintain the house to Vivian's impossible standards in exchange for a roof over my head. The breaking point came on that cold March morning I mentioned earlier. Vivian had arrived for what she called her spring inspection, armed with white gloves and a critical eye that could find fault with anything. She'd already criticized the way I'd arranged the living room furniture. The feng shui is completely wrong. Complained about the cleanliness of the kitchen. I can see water spots on the refrigerator. And found dust in places I was certain I'd cleaned the day before. But it was in the guest bathroom where everything finally came to a head. I had spent an hour the previous evening scrubbing that bathroom from floor to ceiling. I'd used 3 different cleaning products, polished every surface until it gleamed, and even cleaned the light fixtures and baseboards. It was spotless, absolutely, undeniably clean. Vivian stood in the doorway like a queen surveying a peasant's hovel. She put on her white gloves with theatrical precision, then began her inspection. She ran her fingers along the mirror, checked the corners of the shower, examined the grout between the tiles with a magnifying glass she carried in her purse specifically for these inspections. This is completely unacceptable, she declared, holding up her gloves as if they were covered in filth instead of the nearly invisible dust that exists in every human dwelling. Catherine, I'm beginning to wonder if you're really suited for this kind of responsibility. That's when something inside me snapped. 8 months of swallowing my pride. 8 months of being treated like hired help. 8 months of watching my daughter choose her mother-in-law's approval over her own mother's dignity. It all came rushing to the surface. Vivian, I said, my voice calm but carrying a steel edge I hadn't used in years. That bathroom is clean. I spent an hour scrubbing it yesterday. And it's spotless. Quote, she raised one perfectly plucked eyebrow. Your definition of clean and mine clearly differ significantly. Perhaps that's part of the problem. What problem would that be? I asked, stepping fully into the bathroom so we were face to face. The problem, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, is that you seem incapable of maintaining the standards expected in a household like this one. Rebecca has been far too patient with your limitations, but I think it's time for some honest conversation about whether this living arrangement is working for anyone. Limitations. As if being 70 years old made me incapable of cleaning a bathroom properly. That's when Rebecca appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension in our voices. She took one look at our confrontation and immediately assumed I was the problem. "Mom," she said, her voice tight with embarrassment. "What's going on?" "Your mother," Vivian said before I could speak, "seems to think that her cleaning standards are adequate for this household. I'm trying to explain that they're not." Rebecca looked around the pristine bathroom, then back at me with eyes that held no warmth, no support, no recognition that I was her mother, who deserved at least basic respect. "Mom," she said quietly, "maybe you could just give it another quick scrub. You know how important it is that everything is perfect when Vivian visits?" And there it was. The moment when I realized that my own daughter valued her mother-in-law's opinion more than her own mother's dignity. She was asking me, her 70-year-old mother who had raised her, supported her, loved her unconditionally, to get on my hands and knees to re-scrub an already spotless bathroom to appease a woman who saw me as nothing more than defective domestic help. "No," I said, the word coming out strong and clear. Both women stared at me as if I'd started speaking in tongues. "Excuse me?" Vivian's voice could have frozen the entire Puget Sound. "No," I repeated, louder this time. "I will not scrub this bathroom again. It's clean. I am not your maid, Vivian, and I am not Rebecca's maid. I am a 70-year-old woman who has been contributing to this household for 8 months while being treated like hired help that you can never quite fire." Rebecca's face went white. "Mom, please, you're making this so much harder than it needs to be." "Harder than it needs to be?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Rebecca, when did you become someone who asks her mother to scrub toilets to appease your mother-in-law? When did my dignity become something you were willing to trade for this woman's approval?" Vivian stepped forward, and I could see the cold satisfaction in her pale blue eyes. She'd been maneuvering toward this moment for months. "Rebecca," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who controlled the family's purse strings, "I think it's time for you to make a choice. This household needs order, discipline, and respect for proper standards. Your mother clearly cannot provide that." The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. I could see the calculation happening behind Rebecca's eyes. Her mother's feelings weighed against her mother-in-law's financial support. Her loyalty to the woman who'd raised her measured against her fear of losing the lifestyle that Vivian's money provided. And then my daughter, my baby girl, whom I'd rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose dreams I'd encouraged and supported for 45 years, looked me in the eye and chose money over love. "Pack your bags and get out." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt something break inside my chest, not just my heart, but something deeper. The fundamental trust between mother and daughter, built over decades of shared love and mutual support, shattered in that moment like glass hitting concrete. "Rebecca," I whispered, giving her one last chance to take it back, to remember who I was and what I meant to her. "You don't mean that." But the look on her face told me she did. Months of Vivian's manipulation had worked. My daughter had been systematically turned against me, convinced that I was a burden rather than a blessing, a problem to be solved rather than a mother to be cherished. I looked at Vivian, who was watching this family destruction with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a particularly challenging chess match. Then I looked back at Rebecca, who still couldn't meet my eyes. "Fine," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "I'll pack my things." As I turned to leave the bathroom, I heard small footsteps running down the hall. Tyler and Jake appeared, their faces bright with the excitement of seeing their great-grandmother Vivian, and their confusion about why all the adults were gathered in the bathroom. "Grandma Cat," Tyler called out, using the nickname they'd given me. "Are you going to make your famous pancakes for lunch?" I knelt down to hug both my grandsons, feeling their small arms wrap around my neck with the unconscious trust that only children possess. These two boys who'd brought such joy back into my life after Harold's death, who'd made me feel needed and loved again. I have to go away for a while, sweethearts, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. But why? Jake asked, his 8-year-old mind struggling to understand why his grandmother would suddenly leave. I looked over their heads at Rebecca, who was standing frozen in the bathroom doorway, and at Vivian, who was watching this scene with cold satisfaction. Sometimes, I said carefully, grown-ups forget what's really important. But I want you both to remember that Grandma Cat loves you very much, no matter what happens. Will you come back? Tyler asked, his voice small and worried. I kissed both their foreheads, breathing in the sweet scent of childhood that had become so precious to me. I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you'll always be in my heart. It took me 3 hours to pack 8 months of my life into 4 suitcases and 6 boxes. Every item I folded felt like another small goodbye. The sweater Rebecca had given me for Christmas, the photo of Harold on my nightstand, the books I'd been reading to the boys. Rebecca stayed in her room the entire time, claiming she had phone calls to make. Marcus had conveniently left for his office, mumbling something about giving everyone space to work things out. Only Vivian remained, positioning herself in the living room like a supervisor, making sure a fired employee didn't steal the office supplies. As I carried my suitcases to the front door, Tyler and Jake hovering nearby with confusion and tears in their eyes, Vivian decided to deliver her victory speech. Catherine, she said from her position on the sofa I'd vacuumed that very morning, I hope you understand that this is for the best. Some people simply aren't suited for certain lifestyles. I'm sure you'll be much happier somewhere more appropriate for someone in your circumstances. I set down my suitcases and looked at this woman who had systematically destroyed my relationship with my daughter through months of calculated manipulation. This woman who had turned my acts of love and service into evidence of my inadequacy. This woman who had convinced my daughter that her mother's presence was a liability rather than a gift. For the first time in 8 months, I smiled at Vivian Thornfield. Not the polite, subservient smile I'd been wearing like a mask, but a real smile that came from a place deep inside me that she'd never been able to touch. Vivian, I said clearly, my voice carrying to every corner of the house, you have absolutely no idea what you've just set in motion. The confidence in her eyes flickered for just a moment, replaced by something that might have been uncertainty. But you're about to find out, I continued, picking up my suitcases. And when you do, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that you had the chance to treat me with basic human dignity, and you chose not to. Remember that you had the opportunity to build bridges instead of burning them, and you chose destruction instead. I walked to the front door, then turned back one last time. Tyler and Jake were pressed against the stair railing, watching with wide eyes. Rebecca had finally emerged from her room and was standing at the top of the stairs, her face pale and strained. Boys, I called up to my grandsons, remember what Grandma Cat taught you about treating people with kindness and respect. And remember that real strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Then I looked at Rebecca. And you, my dear daughter, remember that dignity isn't something other people can give you or take away from you. It's something you choose to keep or choose to surrender. Today, you surrendered yours, but it's never too late to reclaim it. I opened the front door and stepped out into the March afternoon. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds, casting everything in sharp relief. As I loaded my suitcases into my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 months: freedom. I was 70 years old, newly homeless, with limited savings and nowhere immediate to go. By every practical measure, I should have been terrified. Instead, as I drove away from that house, the house I'd helped purchase, the house where I'd given 8 months of unpaid labor, the house where I'd been systematically humiliated and diminished, I felt more alive than I had since Harold's death. Because for the first time in 8 months, I remembered who Catherine Miller really was. Not a charity case grateful for scraps of tolerance. Not a burden to be managed and eventually discarded. But a woman who had raised a daughter, built a career, maintained a marriage, and survived the death of her life partner. A woman who had dignity, strength, and principles that couldn't be bought, sold, or scrubbed away in anyone's bathroom. As I drove through Seattle's afternoon traffic, I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror. For months, I'd seen a defeated old woman staring back at me. Now I saw something different. a fighter who'd been knocked down but wasn't finished. Vivian Thornfield thought she'd won by getting rid of me. Rebecca thought she'd solved her problem by choosing financial security over family loyalty. They had no idea that they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because Catherine Miller was about to remind them both exactly what happened when you underestimate a 70-year-old woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The call came on a Thursday morning in late June, 3 months after I'd been thrown out of Rebecca's house. I was preparing for another day of substitute teaching when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Miller, this is Jennifer Walsh from Evergreen Elementary. I'm the principal here, and I have an unusual request." I'd substitute taught at Evergreen twice in the past month, both successful assignments where the children had responded well to my teaching style. But I couldn't imagine what kind of unusual request a principal might have. "I'll help if I can," I said cautiously. "We have a situation with one of our second-grade classes. The teacher had a family emergency and will be out for the rest of the school year, about 6 weeks. We need someone experienced who can provide consistency for these children, not just day-to-day coverage. The district coordinator speaks very highly of your work, and frankly, you're the only substitute with the experience and classroom management skills to handle this assignment." A 6-week assignment. Steady work, steady pay, and most importantly, the chance to have my own classroom again, even temporarily. After months of bouncing from school to school, adapting to different environments daily, the prospect of stability was incredibly appealing. "I'd be honored to accept," I said immediately. What I didn't know until I arrived at Evergreen Elementary on Monday morning was that Tyler and Jake attended this school. I was setting up the classroom, arranging desks, and reviewing lesson plans when I heard familiar voices in the hallway. My heart stopped as I recognized Tyler's laugh, followed by Jake's higher-pitched giggle. They were walking past my classroom with their summer camp group, heading to the gym for indoor activities on this rainy Seattle morning. Through the small window in my classroom door, I caught a glimpse of them. They'd grown in the 3 months since I'd seen them. Tyler was taller, and Jake had lost another tooth. They looked healthy and happy, chatting animatedly with their friends, completely unaware that their grandmother was just 30 feet away. The longing that hit me was so intense, I had to sit down. These were my grandsons, the boys I'd read bedtime stories to, helped with homework, made pancakes for on Saturday mornings. Boys who thought I'd abandoned them because that's what their mother had told them. I spent the rest of that day fighting the urge to find an excuse to walk past their classroom, to accidentally bump into them in the hallway, to let them know I was there. But I knew that would be selfish. Rebecca had made her choice, and until I was ready to fully execute my plan, any contact with Tyler and Jake would only confuse and hurt them more. But fate, as it turned out, had other plans. It was my 3rd day at Evergreen when Jake got sick during lunch. I was eating in the faculty room when Mrs. Rodriguez, the school nurse, came looking for help. "Catherine, I know this is awkward, but Jake Morrison is in my office with a fever and upset stomach. His emergency contacts aren't answering their phones. Mom's at work, Dad's teaching, and the grandmother they have listed. Well, that number's been disconnected." The disconnected number would be mine, from when I lived at Rebecca's house. She'd never updated their emergency contacts after throwing me out. His teacher is with another sick child, and I need someone to stay with Jake until we can reach his parents. You're certified, you have clearance, and honestly, you're the only person available. I know it's not technically your responsibility, but... Of course I'll help, I said, my heart racing. Jake was lying on the small cot in the nurse's office, looking pale and miserable. When he saw me walk in, his eyes went wide with shock, then joy, then confusion. "Grandma Cat?" he whispered, sitting up despite his obvious discomfort. "Is it really you?" I knelt beside his cot, fighting back tears. "Yes, sweetheart, it's really me. But Mom said you went away because you didn't want to live with us anymore. She said you were too old to take care of us, and you found somewhere else to go." The lie hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my voice steady. "Jake, honey, that's not what happened. I never wanted to leave you and Tyler. I was asked to leave." "Asked by who?" Before I could answer, Mrs. Rodriguez returned with a thermometer and some children's Tylenol. "Jake's temperature is 101. I finally reached his father. He's in the middle of teaching a class, but he'll be here as soon as he can. Should be about 30 minutes. 30 minutes alone with my grandson. 30 minutes to begin undoing the damage Rebecca's lies had caused. "Grandma Cat," Jake said after taking his medicine, "I missed you so much. Tyler and I talk about you all the time. We kept asking Mom when you were coming back, but she always gets upset and tells us to stop asking. I missed you too, sweetheart, more than you can imagine. Are you going to come back home now that you found us again?" How do you explain family dysfunction to an 8-year-old? How do you tell a child that his mother chose money over love? That his great-grandmother is a manipulative woman who destroys families for sport? It's complicated, Jake, but I want you to know something very important. No matter what anyone tells you, I love you and Tyler more than anything in the world. I think about you every single day. Then why don't you call us? Why don't you visit? Because sometimes adults make decisions that hurt the people they love. And sometimes those decisions make it very hard for families to stay together the way they should. Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this with the serious concentration that 8-year-olds bring to important conversations. "Is Mom one of those adults who made a bad decision?" he asked. Out of the mouths of babes. "Your mom is trying to do what she thinks is best," I said carefully, "but sometimes what people think is best isn't actually what's right." Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, looking flustered and concerned. When he saw me sitting beside Jake's cot, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, discomfort, and finally, resignation. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I didn't know you were. Nobody told me you were working here." "Hello, Marcus," I said, standing up. "Jake has a fever, but he's been very brave. The nurse gave him some Tylenol about 15 minutes ago." "Dad," Jake said, perking up, "look, Grandma Cat is here. She's taking care of me." Marcus looked like a man caught between competing loyalties. I could see him calculating his son's obvious joy at seeing me versus Rebecca and Vivian's ban on contact. "Jake, buddy, let's get you home so you can rest," he said, avoiding my eyes. As Marcus helped Jake gather his backpack, my grandson looked back at me with an expression that broke my heart. "Grandma Cat, will I see you again?" Before Marcus could intervene, I knelt down to Jake's level. "Sweetheart, I work here now. I'm going to be teaching in this school for the next few weeks. So yes, you might see me around." The hope that lit up Jake's face was worth every risk I was taking. That evening, my phone rang. Rebecca's number. "How dare you," were the first words out of her mouth. "How dare you manipulate this situation to get access to my children?" "I didn't manipulate anything, Rebecca. I took a teaching assignment, and your son got sick. I helped because that's what decent people do. You're not allowed to have contact with Tyler and Jake. I made that very clear when you left." When I left, I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "Rebecca, you threw me out. You chose your mother-in-law's approval over your own mother's well-being. And now you're lying to your sons about what really happened. I'm protecting my children from your drama and manipulation." "What drama? What manipulation?" "I refused to scrub a clean bathroom and you threw me out of the house. How is standing up for basic human dignity dramatic or manipulative?" There was a long pause. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was tired rather than angry. "Mom, you don't understand the position I'm in. Vivian controls everything. Our finances, Marcus's job security, the boy's education. If I don't keep her happy, then you lose your comfortable lifestyle," I finished. "I understand perfectly, Rebecca. You sold your mother for a mortgage payment and private school tuition. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. You chose money over family. You chose keeping up appearances over basic human decency. And you're teaching your sons that family loyalty is conditional on financial benefit." Another long pause. "Stay away from my children, Mom. I mean it. Those children are my grandsons too, and unlike you, I would never abandon them for money." She hung up. But the damage was done, to Rebecca's carefully constructed narrative, that is. Jake had seen me, talked to me, realized that I hadn't abandoned him. Word would get back to Tyler, and both boys would start asking questions that Rebecca couldn't answer without revealing her lies. The next morning, I had an unexpected visitor at school. Vivian Thornfield herself, dressed in her usual armor of expensive clothing and righteous indignation, was waiting in the principal's office when I arrived. "Mrs. Miller," Principal Walsh said, looking uncomfortable, Mrs. Thornfield has some concerns about your interaction with her great-grandson yesterday. Vivian sat in the chair across from the principal's desk, like a queen holding court. She'd clearly dressed for battle, a navy blue suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, pearls that caught the light with every movement, and an expression of cold authority that had probably intimidated countless people over the years. "Catherine," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I understand there was some confusion yesterday about appropriate boundaries." "No confusion at all," I replied calmly. "A child needed help and I provided it. That's what educators do." "That child," Vivian said, her voice icy, "is my great-grandson, and his family has made it very clear that contact with you is not in his best interests." Principal Walsh looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with being in the middle of a family dispute. "Mrs. Thornfield, I appreciate your concern, but Mrs. Miller followed all proper protocols yesterday. She was asked by our nurse to supervise a sick child until his father could arrive, and she did so professionally and appropriately. The issue," Vivian continued, "is that Mrs. Miller has been estranged from the family due to her inappropriate behavior and unrealistic expectations. Allowing her access to the children undermines the parents' authority and could be confusing for the boys. Inappropriate behavior, unrealistic expectations. She was rewriting history right there in the principal's office, painting me as the problem instead of acknowledging her role in destroying my relationship with my daughter." "What inappropriate behavior would that be?" I asked quietly. Vivian's eyes flashed with something that might have been surprise. Clearly, she'd expected me to cower under her authority the way I had for those 8 months in Rebecca's house. "Your inability to adapt to family expectations and household standards," she said smoothly. "Your tendency to create drama and conflict rather than contribute positively to family harmony. You mean my refusal to be treated like unpaid domestic help? My unwillingness to scrub clean bathrooms to appease your impossible standards? My insistence on basic human dignity?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Principal Walsh was watching this exchange with growing interest, clearly beginning to understand that this wasn't a simple family dispute, but something much more complex. "Mrs. Thornfield," Principal Walsh said carefully, "while I appreciate your concerns about your great-grandson's well-being, Mrs. Miller is a qualified educator who has been following all school policies. Unless there's evidence of inappropriate conduct in her professional capacity, I can't restrict her from performing her assigned duties." Vivian's composure cracked slightly. She wasn't used to people failing to be intimidated by her wealth and authority. "I trust," she said, standing up with regal dignity, "that you'll keep the best interests of the children in mind. All the children in this school benefit from having board members who are invested in maintaining high standards." The threat was subtle but clear. Vivian was on the school board, or had influence with people who were, and she was suggesting that my employment could be in jeopardy if I didn't comply with her wishes. But Principal Walsh had been dealing with wealthy, entitled parents for 20 years, and she wasn't easily intimidated either. "Mrs. Thornfield, I always keep the best interests of our students in mind, and in my experience, those interests are best served by qualified, caring educators who follow professional protocols, which Mrs. Miller has done consistently." After Vivian left, Principal Walsh closed her office door and looked at me with curiosity and concern. "Catherine, I don't usually get involved in personal family matters, but that woman was essentially threatening both your job and mine if you have any contact with your grandson. What's really going on here?" I gave her the abbreviated version: my husband's death, moving in with Rebecca, the months of being treated like a servant, and finally being thrown out for refusing to accept degrading treatment. "So you're telling me," Principal Walsh said slowly, "that a woman who sits on committees devoted to elder care was instrumental in making her son's mother-in-law homeless?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And now she's trying to prevent you from having any contact with your grandsons, even in a professional capacity?" "Apparently so." Principal Walsh was quiet for a long moment, then shook her head with disgust. "Catherine, I want you to know that as long as you're conducting yourself professionally, which you have been, you have my full support. Family disputes don't override professional qualifications, and I won't allow board politics to interfere with educational excellence. That conversation was a turning point. I realized that Vivian's power, while real, wasn't unlimited. People who knew me professionally respected my qualifications and character. Her attempts to control the narrative about my inappropriate behavior would only work with people who didn't know the truth. Over the next 2 weeks, I settled into a routine that felt almost normal. I taught my second grade class with the passion and skill I'd developed over 30 years in education. I built relationships with my students and their families. And occasionally, I'd catch glimpses of Tyler and Jake in the hallways or on the playground. The boys had clearly told other family members about seeing me, because the reactions started coming quickly. Marcus began picking them up from school personally instead of letting them ride the bus, presumably to minimize the chances of accidental encounters. Rebecca started volunteering for school events she'd never shown interest in before, probably to keep an eye on my activities. But children are resourceful creatures, and Tyler and Jake were no exception. It was a Friday afternoon, my third week at Evergreen, when I found a note slipped under my classroom door after school. Written in Tyler's careful third-grade handwriting, it said, "Grandma Cat, Jake told me you were here. We miss you so much. Can you meet us at the big tree during lunch recess on Monday? We want to tell you something important. Love, Tyler and Jake." My heart broke and soared at the same time. These boys, despite their mother's lies and attempts to keep us apart, still loved me and wanted me in their lives. But meeting them secretly would be exactly the kind of thing Rebecca and Vivian could use against me, evidence that I was undermining parental authority and manipulating the children. I spent the weekend agonizing over what to do. Every instinct I had as a grandmother wanted to meet with Tyler and Jake, to reassure them of my love and find out what they wanted to tell me. But every strategic bone in my body knew that I needed to be smarter than that. On Monday morning, I made my decision. Instead of meeting the boys secretly, I was going to arrange a public documented encounter that couldn't be twisted into evidence of inappropriate behavior. During my lunch break, I walked to the playground with a stack of papers to grade, positioning myself at a picnic table near the big tree where Tyler and Jake had asked to meet me. I made sure other teachers could see me, that my purpose appeared to be work-related, and that any interaction with my grandsons would be clearly visible and innocent. At 12:15, Tyler and Jake appeared at the tree, looking around nervously. When they spotted me at the picnic table, their faces lit up with joy and relief. "Grandma Cat," Tyler called out, running toward me with Jake close behind. I stood up and hugged them both, my heart overflowing with love and gratitude for these brave little boys who'd found a way to reconnect with me despite all the obstacles their family had put in place. "I missed you both so much," I said, kneeling down to their level, "but we need to be careful. Your mom doesn't want us talking to each other." "We know," Jake said seriously, "but we figured out something really important, and we had to tell you." "What did you figure out?" Tyler looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in close. "Great-Grandma Vivian is mean to Mom, too," he whispered. "We heard them fighting about money, and Great-Grandma said some really mean things. She made Mom cry. And then Mom was mean to Dad," Jake added. "She yelled at him about his job and said it was his fault we don't have enough money." These children, in their innocent way, had identified the toxic dynamic that I'd lived with for 8 months. Vivian's financial control created a cascade of stress and cruelty that affected everyone in the family. "We think," Tyler said carefully, "that Mom isn't really mad at you. We think she's scared of Great-Grandma Vivian." The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze me. Tyler, at 8 years old, had grasped something that took me months to fully understand. Rebecca wasn't evil. She was trapped. And trapped people often hurt the people they love because they feel powerless to hurt the people who are actually hurting them. "Boys," I said gently, "that's very smart thinking. But what your mom is going through doesn't excuse how she treated me. Sometimes being scared makes people do wrong things, but that doesn't make those things right. Could you help Mom not be scared anymore?" Jake asked with the simple faith that children have in adult solutions. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you this. I'm never going to stop loving you and Tyler, no matter what happens with the grown-ups." We talked for a few more minutes before they had to return to their class. As I watched them run back toward the school building, I felt a shift in my understanding of the entire situation. I'd been thinking of Rebecca as a co-conspirator in Vivian's cruelty, but Tyler and Jake had shown me another perspective. Rebecca was also a victim who'd chosen to sacrifice her mother rather than fight back against her oppressor. It didn't excuse her actions, but it changed how I thought about possible solutions. That afternoon, I started planning phase 2 of my strategy. Phase 1 had been rebuilding my life and establishing my independence. Phase 2 would be more complex. I was going to create a situation where Rebecca would have to choose between Vivian's approval and her children's well-being. And I was going to make sure she understood the true cost of the choice she'd already made. But first, I needed more information. I needed to understand exactly how Vivian controlled Rebecca and Marcus, and more importantly, I needed to find her weaknesses. I'd been thinking like a victim for too long. It was time to start thinking like a strategist. That evening, I called Eleanor Hartwell. Over the months I'd been working with Dorothy, Eleanor and I had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared values about family, dignity, and treating elderly people with honor rather than tolerance. Eleanor, I said when she answered, I need your advice about something, and possibly your help. Of course, Catherine, what's going on? I told her about the encounter with Vivian at school, the boys' insights about their mother's fear, and my growing understanding of the toxic dynamics in Rebecca's household. So you're thinking of intervening? Eleanor asked when I finished. I'm thinking of creating an opportunity for Rebecca to see what she's really chosen, and what she's teaching her sons about family loyalty and human dignity. That sounds dangerous. Women like Vivian Thornfield don't give up control easily. I know, but Eleanor, those boys are suffering. They're watching their mother be cruel to people she should love, and they're learning that money matters more than loyalty. If I don't do something, they're going to grow up thinking this is normal. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then sighed. What do you need from me? Information. You move in the same social circles as Vivian. You know people who know her, who might have insights into her business dealings, her vulnerabilities, her reputation in the community. Catherine, are you planning some kind of revenge scheme? Not revenge, I said firmly. Justice. There's a difference. Revenge is about hurting people who hurt you. Justice is about making sure actions have appropriate consequences and preventing future harm. And you think you can achieve justice for a 70-year-old woman who was emotionally abused by her daughter and daughter-in-law? Eleanor, I think I can achieve something more important than justice for me. I think I can protect my grandsons from growing up in a toxic environment where love is conditional on financial benefit and elderly people are treated as disposable. That conversation marked the beginning of what I now think of as my education in social warfare. Eleanor introduced me to friends who knew Vivian professionally and socially. I learned about her business practices, her charitable work, her reputation in Seattle's philanthropic community. What I discovered was fascinating. Vivian Thornfield's public persona was built on the foundation of being a devoted family woman, an advocate for vulnerable populations, particularly elderly people. She sat on the boards of 3 organizations devoted to elder care, had endowed a scholarship for geriatric nursing students, and regularly spoke at conferences about honoring our elders. But the people who knew her personally told a different story. Former employees spoke of her arbitrary cruelty and impossible standards. Business associates described her as ruthless and controlling. Even fellow board members admitted, privately, that they found her difficult to work with and suspected her charitable motivations were more about social status than genuine concern. Most importantly, I learned that Vivian's financial empire, while substantial, wasn't as secure as she pretended. The tech investments that had made the Thornfield family wealthy were increasingly volatile, and she'd made some poor decisions in recent years that had eroded her capital significantly. Her control over Marcus and Rebecca wasn't just about maintaining family hierarchy, it was about maintaining the illusion of continued prosperity and social status. She needed them to appear successful and grateful, because their failure would reflect on her legacy and her reputation in the community. Armed with this information, I began to formulate a plan that would expose Vivian's hypocrisy in the most public and devastating way possible. But more than that, I was going to create a situation where Rebecca would have to choose between maintaining her mother-in-law's approval and protecting her own children's emotional well-being. And I was going to make sure that choice happened in front of witnesses who mattered, people whose opinions could affect Vivian's social standing and Rebecca's future opportunities. The annual Thornfield Foundation Gala was scheduled for September 15th, just 6 weeks away. This year's theme was Champions of Elder Care, and Vivian would be presenting awards to individuals and organizations that had made significant contributions to improving the lives of elderly people. The irony was too perfect to resist. I was going to attend that gala, and I was going to make sure that everyone in attendance understood exactly what kind of champion of elder care Vivian Thornfield really was. But first, I needed to lay the groundwork. I needed to plant seeds of doubt about Vivian's character in the minds of the people who mattered most to her social standing, and I needed to give Rebecca one final chance to do the right thing before I exposed the truth about what had happened to me. The deception campaign was about to begin in earnest, and this time, I wasn't going to be the victim of other people's manipulations. I was going to be the one pulling the strings. That first night of freedom was also the loneliest night of my life. I drove aimlessly through Seattle for 2 hours after leaving Rebecca's house, my mind spinning between rage, heartbreak, and the practical reality that I had nowhere to go. The rain had started again, turning the city into a blur of neon reflections and anonymous faces hurrying past under umbrellas. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt truly alone in the world. I finally pulled into the parking lot of a modest hotel near the airport, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask too many questions about why a 70-year-old woman was checking in alone with 4 suitcases and red-rimmed eyes. The clerk, a kind Sikh man named Harpreet, took one look at me and upgraded me to a room with a kitchenette without me asking. "Sometimes we all need a little extra space to think," he said gently, handing me the key card. As I sat on the edge of that hotel bed, surrounded by my hastily packed belongings, the full weight of what had happened hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just homeless. I was familyless. The daughter I'd raised, the grandsons I adored, the life I'd been trying to rebuild after Harold's death. All of it was gone because I'd refused to scrub a clean bathroom. I called my sister Margaret in Phoenix, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Catherine, what's wrong?" she asked immediately, hearing something in my voice. Through tears, I told her everything. The months of humiliation, Vivian's systematic campaign to make me feel worthless, and finally, Rebecca's choice to throw me out rather than stand up for her own mother. "That little witch," Margaret said, her voice blazing with anger. "And I don't mean the mother-in-law, though she sounds like a real piece of work. I mean Rebecca. How dare she treat you like that?" "She's scared, Maggie," I said, though defending Rebecca felt like swallowing glass. "Vivian controls their money. Without her support, they can't maintain their lifestyle." "So she sold her mother for a mortgage payment," Margaret snapped. "Catherine, you raised that girl better than that. You sacrificed everything for her education, her wedding, her down payment on that house. And this is how she repays you?" That night, lying in a strange bed in a sterile hotel room, I made myself face some hard truths. For 8 months, I'd been so grateful to have somewhere to go after Harold's death that I'd accepted treatment I would never have tolerated as a younger woman. I'd let my grief and loneliness make me smaller, quieter, more accommodating. I'd become a woman I didn't recognize, one who apologized for taking up space and accepted scraps of tolerance as if they were gifts. But as I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the highway outside my window, I felt something shifting inside me. The crushing sadness was still there, but underneath it, like a coal slowly warming to flame, was something else. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly, but the slow, steady kind that could sustain me through whatever came next. By morning, I'd made my first decision. I wasn't going to run back to Portland with my tail between my legs. I wasn't going to hide in Phoenix with Margaret, licking my wounds and feeling sorry for myself. I was going to stay in Seattle and rebuild my life, not in spite of what Rebecca and Vivian had done to me, but because of it. The first week was the hardest. I found a small furnished apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, nothing fancy but clean and affordable. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, was a widow herself, and seemed to understand without asking too many questions why a woman my age was starting over alone. "First month and security deposit," she said when I handed her the cash. "But honey, you look like you've been through something." If you need an extra week to get settled before the rent starts, that's fine by me. Kindness from strangers when my own family had shown me cruelty. It was a theme that would repeat itself in the weeks to come. I threw myself into the practical tasks of rebuilding. Opening new bank accounts, updating my address, researching Medicare options since I'd lost the health insurance I'd been getting through Marcus's university plan. Each task felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd surrendered during those 8 months of servitude. But the hardest part was the silence from Rebecca. For 2 weeks, nothing. No call to see if I was okay, no text to ask where I was staying, no acknowledgement that she'd thrown her mother out onto the street like a bag of garbage. The woman who used to call me 3 times a week to chat about everything and nothing had apparently decided I no longer existed. It was Tyler who broke the silence, in a way that shattered my heart all over again. I was in my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, trying to figure out how to work the complicated remote control for the television, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca's number, and for a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe she'd come to her senses. Maybe she realized what she'd done and wanted to make things right. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep the eagerness out of my voice. "Grandma Cat?" The small, hesitant voice was Tyler's, and I could tell immediately that he'd been crying. "Tyler? Sweetheart, what's wrong?" I took Mom's phone when she wasn't looking," he whispered. "I wanted to call you. Jake and I miss you so much. Why did you leave us?" The question pierced through me like a knife. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his mother chose money over family? How do you tell a child that sometimes the adults who are supposed to protect love make terrible, selfish choices? "Oh, honey," I said, sinking into my chair as tears started flowing. "I miss you too, so much." "Are you coming back? Mom says you went away because you didn't want to live with us anymore, but that doesn't sound right. You always said we were your favorite boys in the whole world." Rebecca had lied to them. She'd told her own children that I had abandoned them rather than admit that she'd thrown me out for refusing to be treated like a servant. "Tyler, listen to me very carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I love you and Jake more than anything in the world. I didn't want to leave you. I was forced to leave." "Forced? By who?" Before I could answer, I heard Rebecca's voice in the background, sharp and angry. "Tyler James Morrison, what are you doing with my phone?" "I have to go," Tyler whispered quickly. "But Grandma Cat, please don't forget about us, okay?" The line went dead, and I sat there holding the phone, sobbing for the grandsons who thought I'd abandoned them and for the daughter who was willing to lie to her own children to avoid taking responsibility for her choices. That call changed something fundamental in me. It wasn't enough to rebuild my life. I needed to find a way to protect Tyler and Jake from the toxic environment their mother was creating. But more than that, I needed to make sure Rebecca and Vivian faced consequences for what they'd done. I started doing research. Real research, the kind I used to do when I was preparing lesson plans or helping Harold with his administrative work. I researched elder abuse laws in Washington state. I researched tenants' rights and family law. I researched the Thornfield family business empire and Vivian's various charitable organizations. What I found was fascinating. The Thornfield Foundation, Vivian's primary charitable vehicle, claimed to support family stability and elder care initiatives. The irony was almost laughable. A woman who'd driven her son's mother-in-law into homelessness was publicly championing elder care. But more interesting were the tax documents I found online. The foundation was supposed to donate a certain percentage of its assets annually to maintain its tax-exempt status, and from what I could tell, those donations were consistently barely meeting the legal minimum. I also discovered that Marcus's position at the University of Washington wasn't as secure as Rebecca had led me to believe. He was an adjunct professor, not tenured faculty, and his contract was renewed year by year. Without Vivian's financial support, they wouldn't just lose their comfortable lifestyle, they might lose everything. But the most interesting discovery came when I was researching property records for their house. The deed was in Rebecca and Marcus's names, but there was also a lien on the property held by Thornfield Holdings, LLC, one of Vivian's companies. She'd essentially loaned them the money for the house, secured by the property itself. If they defaulted on those payments, she could foreclose and take the house. My daughter wasn't just financially dependent on Vivian. She was trapped by her. And, like many trapped people, she'd chosen to trap someone else, rather than find a way to freedom. 3 weeks after Tyler's phone call, I made my second major decision. I was going to go back to work. At 70, most people would consider themselves retired, finished with the working world. But I'd always loved teaching, and I'd only stopped when Harold got sick and needed care during his final months. Now I needed something more than just surviving. I needed purpose, income, and most importantly, I needed to rebuild my sense of self-worth. The Seattle Public School District was desperate for substitute teachers, especially one. That first night of freedom was also the loneliest night of my life. I drove aimlessly through Seattle for 2 hours after leaving Rebecca's house, my mind spinning between rage, heartbreak, and the practical reality that I had nowhere to go. The rain had started again, turning the city into a blur of neon reflections and anonymous faces hurrying past under umbrellas. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt truly alone in the world. I finally pulled into the parking lot of a modest hotel near the airport, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask too many questions about why a 70-year-old woman was checking in alone with 4 suitcases and red-rimmed eyes. The clerk, a kind Sikh man named Harpreet, took one look at me and upgraded me to a room with a kitchenette without me asking. "Sometimes we all need a little extra space to think," he said gently, handing me the key card. As I sat on the edge of that hotel bed, surrounded by my hastily packed belongings, the full weight of what had happened hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just homeless. I was familyless. The daughter I'd raised, the grandsons I adored, the life I'd been trying to rebuild after Harold's death. All of it was gone because I'd refused to scrub a clean bathroom. I called my sister Margaret in Phoenix, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Catherine, what's wrong?" she asked immediately, hearing something in my voice. Through tears, I told her everything. The months of humiliation, Vivian's systematic campaign to make me feel worthless, and finally, Rebecca's choice to throw me out rather than stand up for her own mother. "That little witch," Margaret said, her voice blazing with anger. "And I don't mean the mother-in-law, though she sounds like a real piece of work. I mean Rebecca. How dare she treat you like that?" "She's scared, Maggie," I said, though defending Rebecca felt like swallowing glass. "Vivian controls their money. Without her support, they can't maintain their lifestyle." "So she sold her mother for a mortgage payment," Margaret snapped. "Catherine, you raised that girl better than that. You sacrificed everything for her education, her wedding, her down payment on that house. And this is how she repays you?" That night, lying in a strange bed in a sterile hotel room, I made myself face some hard truths. For 8 months, I'd been so grateful to have somewhere to go after Harold's death that I'd accepted treatment I would never have tolerated as a younger woman. I'd let my grief and loneliness make me smaller, quieter, more accommodating. I'd become a woman I didn't recognize, one who apologized for taking up space and accepted scraps of tolerance as if they were gifts. But as I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the highway outside my window, I felt something shifting inside me. The crushing sadness was still there, but underneath it, like a coal slowly warming to flame, was something else. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly, but the slow, steady kind that could sustain me through whatever came next. By morning, I'd made my first decision. I wasn't going to run back to Portland with my tail between my legs. I wasn't going to hide in Phoenix with Margaret, licking my wounds and feeling sorry for myself. I was going to stay in Seattle and rebuild my life, not in spite of what Rebecca and Vivian had done to me, but because of it. The first week was the hardest. I found a small furnished apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, nothing fancy but clean and affordable. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, was a widow herself, and seemed to understand without asking too many questions why a woman my age was starting over alone. "First month and security deposit," she said when I handed her the cash. "But honey, you look like you've been through something. If you need an extra week to get settled before the rent starts, that's fine by me." Kindness from strangers when my own family had shown me cruelty. It was a theme that would repeat itself in the weeks to come. I threw myself into the practical tasks of rebuilding. Opening new bank accounts, updating my address, researching Medicare options since I'd lost the health insurance I'd been getting through Marcus's university plan. Each task felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd surrendered during those 8 months of servitude. But the hardest part was the silence from Rebecca. For 2 weeks, nothing. No call to see if I was okay, no text to ask where I was staying, no acknowledgement that she'd thrown her mother out onto the street like a bag of garbage. The woman who used to call me 3 times a week to chat about everything and nothing had apparently decided I no longer existed. It was Tyler who broke the silence, in a way that shattered my heart all over again. I was in my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, trying to figure out how to work the complicated remote control for the television, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca's number, and for a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe she'd come to her senses. Maybe she realized what she'd done and wanted to make things right. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep the eagerness out of my voice. "Grandma Cat?" The small, hesitant voice was Tyler's, and I could tell immediately that he'd been crying. "Tyler? Sweetheart, what's wrong?" I took Mom's phone when she wasn't looking," he whispered. "I wanted to call you. Jake and I miss you so much. Why did you leave us?" The question pierced through me like a knife. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his mother chose money over family? How do you tell a child that sometimes the adults who are supposed to protect love make terrible, selfish choices? "Oh, honey," I said, sinking into my chair as tears started flowing. "I miss you too, so much." "Are you coming back? Mom says you went away because you didn't want to live with us anymore, but that doesn't sound right. You always said we were your favorite boys in the whole world." Rebecca had lied to them. She'd told her own children that I had abandoned them rather than admit that she'd thrown me out for refusing to be treated like a servant. "Tyler, listen to me very carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I love you and Jake more than anything in the world. I didn't want to leave you. I was forced to leave." "Forced? By who?" Before I could answer, I heard Rebecca's voice in the background, sharp and angry. "Tyler James Morrison, what are you doing with my phone?" "I have to go," Tyler whispered quickly. "But Grandma Cat, please don't forget about us, okay?" The line went dead, and I sat there holding the phone, sobbing for the grandsons who thought I'd abandoned them and for the daughter who was willing to lie to her own children to avoid taking responsibility for her choices. That call changed something fundamental in me. It wasn't enough to rebuild my life. I needed to find a way to protect Tyler and Jake from the toxic environment their mother was creating. But more than that, I needed to make sure Rebecca and Vivian faced consequences for what they'd done. I started doing research. Real research, the kind I used to do when I was preparing lesson plans or helping Harold with his administrative work. I researched elder abuse laws in Washington state. I researched tenants' rights and family law. I researched the Thornfield family business empire and Vivian's various charitable organizations. What I found was fascinating. The Thornfield Foundation, Vivian's primary charitable vehicle, claimed to support family stability and elder care initiatives. The irony was almost laughable. A woman who'd driven her son's mother-in-law into homelessness was publicly championing elder care. But more interesting were the tax documents I found online. The foundation was supposed to donate a certain percentage of its assets annually to maintain its tax-exempt status, and from what I could tell, those donations were consistently barely meeting the legal minimum. I also discovered that Marcus's position at the University of Washington wasn't as secure as Rebecca had led me to believe. He was an adjunct professor, not tenured faculty, and his contract was renewed year by year. Without Vivian's financial support, they wouldn't just lose their comfortable lifestyle, they might lose everything. But the most interesting discovery came when I was researching property records for their house. The deed was in Rebecca and Marcus's names, but there was also a lien on the property held by Thornfield Holdings, LLC, one of Vivian's companies. She'd essentially loaned them the money for the house, secured by the property itself. If they defaulted on those payments, she could foreclose and take the house. My daughter wasn't just financially dependent on Vivian. She was trapped by her. And, like many trapped people, she'd chosen to trap someone else, rather than find a way to freedom. 3 weeks after Tyler's phone call, I made my second major decision. I was going to go back to work. At 70, most people would consider themselves retired, finished with the working world. But I'd always loved teaching. And I'd only stopped when Harold got sick and needed care during his final months. Now I needed something more than just surviving. I needed purpose, income, and most importantly, I needed to rebuild my sense of self-worth. The Seattle Public School District was desperate for substitute teachers, especially ones with my experience and credentials. When I walked into the district office with my resume and references, the hiring coordinator looked at me like I was a gift from heaven. 30 years of elementary education experience, she said, scanning my paperwork. Mrs. Miller, when can you start? Tomorrow, I said. And just like that, I was back in the classroom. Not my own classroom. Substitute teaching meant moving from school to school, adapting to different environments and different students every day. But it was exactly what I needed. Every day brought new challenges, new faces, new opportunities to remember who I really was underneath all the pain and humiliation of the past year. The children were my salvation. 8-year-olds don't care if you're 70 or 30. They care if you listen to them, if you help them with their problems, if you treat them with respect and kindness. Every day I spent with them was a reminder that I had value, that I had skills and experience that mattered. And I was good at it. Really good. Within a month, principals were requesting me specifically. Mrs. Miller has this magic touch with the kids, one told the district coordinator. They actually behave better for her than they do for their regular teachers. My confidence began to return, brick by brick. The woman who had cowered under Vivian's criticism and accepted Rebecca's demands was being replaced by someone stronger, someone who remembered her worth. But I still thought about Tyler and Jake every day. I wondered if they were okay, if they still remembered me, if Rebecca was being honest with them about why I'd left. The not knowing was eating away at me. That's when I met Eleanor Hartwell. I was substitute teaching at Magnolia Elementary when the regular third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, mentioned that her neighbor was looking for someone to help with her elderly mother. She's a lovely woman, very wealthy, but she needs someone trustworthy to help with companionship and light housekeeping for her mother, Mrs. Patterson said during lunch. The pay is excellent, and it's only part-time, might be perfect for someone like you who's semi-retired. Something about the situation intrigued me. A wealthy family needing elder care, treating it as a professional arrangement rather than a burden to be managed. It was so different from my experience with Rebecca and Vivian that I was curious to see how other families handled these dynamics. The interview was at a mansion in the Queen Anne neighborhood, the kind of old-money Seattle establishment that made even Vivian's Laurelhurst house look modest. Eleanor Hartwell met me at the door, a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and an expensive but understated style that spoke of confidence rather than insecurity. Mrs. Miller, she said, shaking my hand warmly, thank you so much for coming. Please come in and meet my mother. Dorothy Hartwell was 89 years old, sharp as a tack, and confined to a wheelchair after a stroke 6 months earlier. She lived in a beautiful suite on the first floor of her daughter's house, surrounded by family photos and books and all the treasures of a long, well-lived life. So you're the teacher Eleanor found, she said, looking me up and down with eyes that missed nothing. Good. I'm tired of those young girls who think talking louder will help me understand them better. What do you know about bridge? I've been playing for 40 years, I said. Excellent. And politics? I try to stay informed. Even better, most of the women they send me want to talk about soap operas and celebrities. I'd rather discuss the state of the world with someone who has a functioning brain. I liked Dorothy immediately. Here was a woman who'd maintained her dignity and her standards, even in the face of physical limitations. More importantly, here was a daughter who honored her mother instead of seeing her as a burden. Over the next 2 hours, Eleanor explained what they needed. Someone to spend 3 afternoons a week with Dorothy, playing cards, discussing books, helping with correspondence, and providing companionship. The pay was generous, almost too generous, but Eleanor explained it simply. My mother raised 6 children, built a successful business with my father, and has been the cornerstone of our family for 9 decades, she said. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in late August, delivered by courier to my small Capitol Hill apartment. Thick, cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold lettering announced the Thornfield Foundation's annual gala, Champions of Elder Care. The return address was from the Foundation's event planning committee, but I knew exactly who had arranged for me to receive it. Eleanor Hartwell had been busy on my behalf. Catherine, she'd said during our conversation the week before, if you're serious about exposing Vivian's hypocrisy, you need to do it in front of the people who matter to her most. The gala will have every major philanthropist, politician, and social leader in Seattle. It's her biggest stage of the year. But how do I get an invitation? I'm hardly on their social register. Eleanor had smiled with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of navigating Seattle's elite social circles. Leave that to me. I know people on the planning committee who owe me favors. You'll get an invitation as a representative of the educational community, someone who works with elderly volunteers in schools. Now, holding the invitation in my hands, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. In 3 weeks, I would be walking into Vivian Thornfield's territory, surrounded by her allies and admirers, with the intention of revealing her true character to the people whose opinions she valued most. But first, I had to survive the most dangerous part of my plan, making contact with Rebecca one final time. I'd been thinking about Tyler and Jake's insights into their mother's fear and Vivian's control. If Rebecca was truly another victim in this situation, trapped by financial dependence and emotional manipulation, then she deserved a chance to break free before I brought her entire world crashing down around her. The question was how to approach her without triggering her defensive mechanisms or alerting Vivian to what I was planning. The answer came from an unexpected source, Marcus. I was leaving Evergreen Elementary after another successful day of teaching when I found him waiting by my car in the parking lot. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, with new lines around his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders that spoke of chronic stress. "Catherine," he said as I approached, his voice hesitant. "Could we talk, just for a few minutes?" Quote, I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hostility, but all I saw was exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "Of course, Marcus. But I should mention that I have a very clear understanding of where your family stands on having contact with me." He winced at my words. That's part of what I wanted to talk about. Catherine, I owe you an apology. A huge apology. What happened in March? The way you were treated, the way you were dismissed. It wasn't right. This was not what I'd expected. For months, I'd painted Marcus as a weak man who'd chosen his mother's money over his wife's mother's dignity. But looking at him now, I saw something different. A man who was drowning in obligations and expectations he couldn't meet. "What's changed, Marcus? 3 months ago, you were perfectly willing to let your mother orchestrate my humiliation and eviction. 3 months ago, I was terrified," he admitted. "I still am, honestly. But Catherine, things have gotten so much worse since you left. Vivian's control over our lives has become suffocating. And Rebecca," he paused, running his hands through his hair, "Rebecca is becoming someone I don't recognize." "What do you mean?" Marcus glanced around the parking lot, checking to make sure we weren't being observed. "She's starting to treat Tyler and Jake the way Vivian treated you. Setting impossible standards, criticizing everything they do, making them feel like they're burdens instead of blessings." My blood ran cold. What kind of standards? "Their rooms have to be perfect at all times. Their homework has to be completed to Vivian's specifications, not just their teachers. They're not allowed to be children anymore. They have to behave like little adults who never make noise, never make messes, never inconvenience anyone." The cycle was continuing. Vivian had crushed Rebecca's spirit, Rebecca had transferred that cruelty to me, and now she was passing it on to her own children. Tyler and Jake were being shaped into the next generation of victims unless someone intervened. "Marcus, why are you telling me this?" "Because Tyler asked me something last week that broke my heart. He wanted to know if he and Jake were going to have to leave like you did if they weren't good enough." The image of my 8-year-old grandsons living in fear of abandonment, believing that love was conditional on perfect behavior, made me feel physically sick. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that would never happen, but Catherine, I'm not sure I can keep that promise. Rebecca is so afraid of losing Vivian's approval that she's willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to keep the peace, including her own children's emotional well-being." Marcus was giving me the opening I needed, but I had to be careful. One wrong word, one hint of my larger plan, and he might retreat back into his family's defensive patterns. "What do you want from me, Marcus?" "I want you to talk to Rebecca. She won't listen to me anymore. She says I don't understand the pressure she's under, that I don't appreciate the sacrifices she's making to keep our family secure. But maybe, if it comes from you. Rebecca made it very clear that she doesn't want contact with me. She told me to stay away from her children. She's scared, Catherine. She's terrified that if she shows any weakness, any divided loyalty, Vivian will cut us off completely. We'd lose the house, the boys' school, everything. And you think that would be worse than what's happening now? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ground. A month ago, I would have said yes. But watching what this situation is doing to Tyler and Jake, seeing Rebecca turn into someone who would rather hurt her own children than risk her mother-in-law's disapproval, I'm starting to think we might all be better off poor and free than comfortable and trapped. This was the breakthrough I'd been hoping for. Marcus was beginning to understand that financial security bought with emotional abuse wasn't security at all. It was a prison with expensive furnishings. If I agree to talk to Rebecca, what makes you think she'll listen? She's invested months in justifying her choices. People don't usually abandon positions they've worked that hard to defend. Because deep down, she knows what she did to you was wrong. She's been having nightmares since March, waking up crying about dreams where she's old and alone and her own children won't help her. She's terrified that Tyler and Jake will treat her the way she treated you. Guilt and fear, the foundations of Rebecca's current life. Vivian had built her control on Rebecca's terror of financial insecurity. But that control was creating new fears about her children's future love and loyalty. Where would this conversation take place? I assume Rebecca doesn't want me in your house. Quote. Actually, Marcus said, looking embarrassed. Rebecca doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm at a faculty meeting. If she knew I was talking to you, she'd see it as betrayal. Yes, but Catherine, I'm already betraying someone. Either I'm betraying you and my own conscience by staying silent, or I'm betraying Rebecca and Vivian by speaking up. I've decided I'd rather betray the people who are destroying my family than the people who might help save it. The desperation in his voice was real, and it gave me hope that perhaps this family could still be salvaged. But it also reminded me how carefully I needed to proceed. One mistake, one moment of appearing vindictive or manipulative, and I'd lose this opportunity forever. Marcus, I'll talk to Rebecca, but it has to be on neutral ground, and it has to be her choice to meet with me. I won't ambush her or put her in a position where she feels cornered. Thank you, he said, the relief in his voice evident. I'll figure out how to suggest it to her without making it seem like my idea. And Marcus, whatever happens between Rebecca and me, you need to protect Tyler and Jake. They didn't choose this situation, and they shouldn't have to pay the price for adult decisions. I know, I'm trying, but it's complicated. Vivian has so much influence over their daily lives. Then limit that influence. You're their father. You have rights and responsibilities that supersede Vivian's preferences. As Marcus drove away, I felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The conversation had revealed that my strategy was working. Vivian's control was becoming so oppressive that even her allies were beginning to question her methods. But it had also raised the stakes considerably. If I mishandled the situation with Rebecca, I might push her further into Vivian's camp and make things even worse for Tyler and Jake. The call came 2 days later, on a Thursday evening. Rebecca's voice was tentative, almost frightened. Mom? Marcus said. He said you might be willing to talk to me. The word mom hit me like a physical blow. For months she'd been Rebecca in my mind, the daughter who'd betrayed me. Hearing her call me mom again brought back memories of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared, who used to beg me to read her one more bedtime story. I'm willing to listen, Rebecca. Whether we talk depends on what you have to say. Could we meet somewhere? Somewhere private where we can talk without... She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Somewhere Vivian wouldn't know about it. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in the University District. Neutral territory that was convenient for both of us, but unlikely to be frequented by anyone from Vivian's social circle. As I drove there on Saturday afternoon, I reminded myself of my goals. Understand Rebecca's state of mind, give her one final chance to do the right thing, and gather information that might be useful at the gala. Rebecca was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was an anchor. She looked older than her 45 years, with new gray streaks in her hair and a thinness that spoke of chronic stress rather than intentional weight loss. "Mom," she said as I sat down across from her, "thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I should," I replied honestly. "Rebecca, the last time we spoke, you told me to stay away from your children. Now you want to talk. What's changed?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. "Everything's falling apart, Mom. Everything I thought I was protecting by making the choices I made, it's all falling apart anyway." "Tell me what's happening." She's gotten worse since you left. So much worse. She's at our house almost every day now, finding fault with everything. The way I discipline the boys, the way I manage the household, the way Marcus performs at work, nothing is ever good enough for her. And how does that make you feel?" "Exhausted, terrified, like I'm walking on eggshells every moment of every day, waiting for the next criticism, the next threat to withdraw her support." I wanted to say, "Now you know how I felt for 8 months, but I held my tongue." Rebecca was beginning to understand the price of appeasing a controlling person, and I didn't want to derail her realization with accusations. "What about Tyler and Jake? How are they handling the increased pressure?" Rebecca's face crumpled. "They're scared all the time. They're afraid to play, afraid to laugh too loudly, afraid to be children. Tyler asked me last week if he and Jake were going to be sent away like you were, if they weren't good enough." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that would never happen. But Mom, I'm not sure it's true. Vivian has started making comments about boarding schools, about how the boys need more structure and discipline than they can get at home." The pattern was becoming clear. Vivian systematically removed anyone who might challenge her authority or compete for affection within the family. First me, eventually Tyler and Jake, until Rebecca was completely isolated and dependent. "Rebecca, do you see what's happening? Do you understand that Vivian's goal isn't to help your family? It's to control it completely." "I know," she whispered. "I've known for months, but I felt trapped. Without her financial support, we'd lose everything. The house, the boys' school, Marcus's job security. I thought I was protecting my family by keeping her happy. And instead, I'm watching my family dissolve around me. Marcus barely speaks to me anymore, except when it's about managing Vivian's expectations. The boys are afraid of me because I've become someone who yells at them for things that aren't their fault. And I threw away my relationship with my own mother to appease a woman who's never going to be satisfied no matter what I do. This was the opening I'd been waiting for, but I had to be careful not to push too hard. Rebecca, it's not too late to change course. You can still choose your family's emotional well-being over Vivian's financial control." "How?" "If I stand up to her, she'll cut us off completely. We'll lose everything. You'll lose the house, and the private school, and the comfortable lifestyle. But you'll gain something more valuable, your family's integrity and your children's respect." That's easy for you to say. You don't have children depending on you for stability and security. The irony of that statement was breathtaking. "Rebecca, I raised you. I sacrificed constantly to provide you with stability and security. And when I needed support in return, you threw me out rather than risk your mother-in-law's disapproval." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I know what I did to you was unforgivable. But Mom, I was terrified. Vivian made it clear that if I didn't choose between you and her, she'd make the choice for me by cutting off all support. So you chose her money over your mother's dignity. I chose what I thought was best for Tyler and Jake. No, Rebecca, you chose what was easiest for you in the short term. And now you're discovering that appeasing a controlling person doesn't lead to peace. It leads to escalating demands and increasing control. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken truth settling between us. I could see Rebecca processing what I'd said, wrestling with the cognitive dissonance between her justifications and the reality of her situation. "Mom," she said finally, "if I could undo what happened in March, I would. If I could go back and stand up to Vivian, choose your dignity over her approval, I would do it differently." "But you can't go back. You can only choose what to do now." "What do you mean?" This was the moment I'd been building toward, the chance to offer Rebecca redemption while also advancing my own plans. I mean, you can still choose to do the right thing. You can still choose to protect your children's emotional well-being over Vivian's financial control. You can still choose to be the mother who stands up for family instead of the mother who sacrifices family for convenience. How? By telling the truth about what really happened between us. By acknowledging that I didn't abandon Tyler and Jake, I was forced out for refusing to accept degrading treatment. By making it clear to your sons that family loyalty matters more than financial security. Rebecca looked terrified. If I do that, if I admit that what we did to you was wrong, Vivian will show her true colors in front of witnesses. And your boys will see that their mother is finally willing to choose integrity over money. I can't, Mom. I'm not brave enough. I'm not strong enough to risk losing everything. Rebecca, you're losing everything anyway. You're losing your children's respect, your husband's trust, your own self-worth. The only question is whether you lose those things while fighting for what's right, or while appeasing someone who will never be satisfied. She started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that spoke of months of suppressed guilt and fear. I wanted to comfort her, to reach across the table and hold her hand the way I had when she was a child with scraped knees and hurt feelings. But I couldn't afford to let maternal instinct override strategic thinking. What would you want me to do? She asked through her tears. I want you to attend the Thornfield Foundation Gala with me. She looked up, startled. What? The gala next month. The one honoring champions of elder care. I want you to come with me and see Vivian, in her public persona, surrounded by people who believe she's a devoted advocate for elderly people. I want you to see the hypocrisy of a woman who claims to champion elder care while systematically abusing an elderly family member. I can't do that. If Vivian saw us there together, she'd realize that her control over you isn't as complete as she thought. She'd understand that you're capable of making choices that prioritize relationships over money. And then she'd destroy us financially. Rebecca, she's already destroying you, just not financially. She's destroying your family's emotional bonds, your children's sense of security, your marriage, your relationship with me. The only question is whether you're going to let her destroy your integrity too. Rebecca stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the battle happening behind her eyes. Fear warring with guilt, financial security battling emotional truth, the easy path competing with the right path. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. But Rebecca, while you're thinking, remember this. Tyler and Jake are watching everything you do. They're learning from your choices about what matters most in life. Do you want them to learn that love is conditional on financial benefit? Or do you want them to learn that some things, dignity, integrity, family loyalty, are worth more than money? I left her sitting in that coffee shop, staring into her cold coffee and wrestling with the choice that would define not just her future, but her children's understanding of what family really means. Driving home, I felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The conversation had revealed that Rebecca was suffering under Vivian's control, which meant she might be ready to break free. But it had also shown me how deeply the fear had taken root. Convincing someone to risk everything they think they need for something they know they should want is one of the hardest challenges in human psychology. Over the next week, I threw myself into preparing for the gala. Eleanor had arranged for me to have a table with several other educators who worked with elderly volunteers, giving me credibility and cover for my attendance. I purchased an appropriate dress, elegant but not flashy, expensive enough to fit in but not so expensive as to raise questions about a substitute teacher's budget. Most importantly, I prepared my speech. If everything went according to plan, I would have an opportunity to address the gala attendees. Eleanor had discovered that there would be an open microphone session where community members could share stories about elder care champions they wanted to recognize. It was meant to be a feel-good segment where people praised local heroes, but I intended to use it for something very different. I was going to tell my story, not with anger or bitterness, but with dignity and truth. I was going to describe what it felt like to be an elderly person whose contributions were dismissed, whose dignity was systematically eroded, whose family chose financial convenience over emotional loyalty. And I was going to do it while looking directly at Vivian Thornfield, in front of 300 of Seattle's most influential citizens. The question was whether Rebecca would be there to hear it. Whether she would find the courage to stand up for truth in front of the woman who had controlled her life for so long, I wouldn't know until the night of the gala. But regardless of Rebecca's choice, I was going to that event. I was going to tell my story. And I was going to make sure that Vivian Thornfield's reputation as a champion of elder care was exposed for the lie it really was. The danger zone was exactly where I needed to be. Because sometimes, the only way to protect the people you love is to risk everything you have left to lose. 3 days before the gala, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Miller? This is Dr. Patricia Graves from the University of Washington School of Social Work. I understand you've had some experiences with elder care that might be relevant to a research project I'm conducting. Eleanor's network had been busy. Dr. Graves was studying patterns of elder abuse in affluent families, and she was particularly interested in cases where financial dependence was used as a tool of control. I'd be happy to help with your research, I said. Wonderful. Would you be available to be interviewed next week? I should mention that this research will be presented at the National Conference on Elder Rights next month, and portions of it may be published in academic journals. Published research. Academic credibility. Another layer of protection and legitimacy for my story. Dr. Graves, would you be interested in attending a community event where these issues might be discussed? I think you'd find it educational. What kind of event? Quote, the Thornfield Foundation Gala. They're honoring champions of elder care, and I think you might be interested in observing how these issues play out in real-world settings. I'd be very interested indeed. By the time I hung up, I had arranged for Dr. Graves to attend the gala as my guest. An expert in elder abuse, armed with knowledge of my case, would be in the audience when I told my story. The pieces were falling into place. The stage was set. In 3 days, I would walk into Vivian Thornfield's world and remind everyone present what real elder care looked like and what it didn't. But first I had one more phone call to make. Tyler, it's Grandma Cat. Is your mom there? Grandma, we miss you so much. Mom's been crying a lot lately, and she keeps staring at her phone like she wants to call someone but doesn't know what to say. My heart broke for these children who are watching their family disintegrate without understanding why. Tyler, I want you to give your mom a message, okay? Tell her that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is the right thing, even when we're scared. Tell her that Grandma Cat believes she can be brave when it matters most. Okay, Grandma, are you going to come back home soon? I don't know, sweetheart. But I promise you this, no matter what happens, I will always love you and Jake more than anything in the world. As I hung up, I realized that my phone call might have just sealed Rebecca's decision one way or the other. Either it would give her the courage she needed to stand up to Vivian, or it would terrify her into even deeper compliance. In 3 days, I would find out which path she had chosen. But regardless of her decision, I was ready for the most dangerous phase of my plan. It was time to enter Vivian Thornfield's domain and remind her, and everyone who knew her, what happened when you underestimated the dignity and determination of a 70-year-old woman who had nothing left to lose. The night of the Thornfield Foundation Gala arrived with the kind of crisp September evening that makes Seattle feel magical. As I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy blue dress I'd chosen for the occasion, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced since Harold's death. Tonight, after months of planning, strategy, and careful preparation, the truth would finally come to light. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Table 12. Dr. Graves is already there with her recording equipment. You look magnificent, by the way. I saw you arrive. I smiled at my reflection. At 70 years old, I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who had survived decades of life's challenges and emerged with her dignity intact. The woman who had cowered under Vivian's criticism, who had accepted Rebecca's demands for subservience, was gone. In her place stood Catherine Miller, educator, survivor, protector of children, and tonight, seeker of justice. The Four Seasons Ballroom was transformed into an elegant showcase of Seattle's philanthropic elite. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen, each centerpiece a carefully arranged display of autumn flowers. The stage at the front of the room bore the Thornfield Foundation logo and a banner reading Champions of Elder Care, honoring those who serve. I made my way to table 12, where Eleanor had arranged for me to sit with 5 other educators who worked with elderly volunteers. Dr. Patricia Graves, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, stood as I approached. "Mrs. Miller," she said, extending her hand warmly. "I'm so grateful you invited me tonight. I have a feeling this will be very educational indeed." As I settled into my seat, I scanned the room for familiar faces. Vivian held court at the head table, resplendent in a silver gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. She was surrounded by Seattle's mayor, several city council members, and the kind of wealthy donors whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. But there was no sign of Rebecca or Marcus. My heart sank slightly. I'd hoped that our coffee shop conversation had given Rebecca the courage to attend, to finally stand up for truth over financial security. But as the minutes ticked by and the ballroom filled with guests, it became clear that she'd chosen the safety of staying away over the risk of confronting Vivian publicly. "Catherine?" Eleanor leaned over from the adjacent table. "Don't look now, but there's some drama unfolding at the registration table." I turned discreetly and felt my breath catch. Rebecca stood at the entrance to the ballroom, wearing a simple black dress and clutching a small purse like a lifeline. She looked terrified but determined, scanning the room until her eyes found mine across the crowded space. Behind her, Marcus held Tyler and Jake by the hands. The boys were dressed in their best clothes, looking around the elegant ballroom with wide eyes. Marcus caught my gaze and nodded once, a gesture that seemed to say, "We're here. We're ready." My daughter had found her courage after all. Rebecca approached our table slowly, as if walking through quicksand. The conversations around her gradually died, as people noticed the family making their way toward the educators' table, rather than toward Vivian's head table, where they clearly belonged by social hierarchy. "Mom," Rebecca said quietly as she reached my chair, "may we join you?" I stood and embraced my daughter for the first time in 6 months. She felt fragile in my arms, like a bird with broken wings learning to fly again. "Of course," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Boys, come give Grandma Kat the biggest hugs in the world." Tyler and Jake launched themselves at me with the uncomplicated joy that only children possess. In that moment, surrounded by my family and watched by 300 of Seattle's most influential citizens, I felt a happiness so pure, it nearly brought me to tears. "Grandma Kat," Tyler whispered in my ear, "Mom told us the truth about what really happened. She said she was sorry for lying to us. And she said," Jake added, "that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes but they can still choose to do the right thing." Eleanor quickly arranged for additional chairs to be brought to our table. As my family settled in around me, I noticed the ripple of conversation spreading through the ballroom. This was not the seating arrangement anyone had expected. Rebecca Morrison, Vivian Thornfield's daughter-in-law, sitting with the educators instead of at the family table, was a clear statement that something significant was happening. At the head table, Vivian's face had gone rigid with controlled fury. She was trapped, surrounded by donors and dignitaries, unable to cause a scene without revealing her true nature, but clearly understanding that Rebecca's choice of seating represented a direct challenge to her authority. The evening's program began with dinner and the usual round of speeches about the Foundation's good works. Vivian delivered the keynote address about the importance of honoring and caring for elderly family members, her voice warm with apparent compassion as she spoke about the sacred duty families have to protect their most vulnerable members. "Too often," she said, gesturing eloquently from the podium, "we see elderly people treated as burdens rather than the treasures they truly are. Their wisdom, their experience, their unconditional love, these are gifts that should be cherished, not dismissed." The irony was so thick I could taste it. Dr. Graves leaned toward me and whispered, "Is she always this hypocritical, or is tonight special?" "Tonight is about average," I replied quietly. As Vivian's speech concluded to enthusiastic applause, I felt Rebecca's hand slip into mine under the table. Her palm was sweaty with nerves, but her grip was firm. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm ready to tell them the truth." The open microphone session began at 9 o'clock. Community members were invited to share stories about unsung heroes in elder care, local champions who deserved recognition for their dedication to improving elderly lives. The first few speakers told heartwarming stories about nurses, social workers, and family members who'd gone above and beyond to care for aging relatives. The audience responded with warm applause, comfortable in their collective sense of doing good work in the world. When my turn came, I walked to the podium with steady steps, my family's eyes following me across the ballroom. Dr. Graves had her recording equipment ready, Eleanor was filming discreetly on her phone, and 300 of Seattle's elite were about to hear a story they weren't expecting. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "My name is Catherine Miller. I'm 70 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, and for the past 6 months, I've been homeless." The comfortable murmur of conversation died instantly. Homelessness wasn't typically discussed at charity galas, especially not by well-dressed elderly women speaking from the podium. I became homeless not because of mental illness, addiction, or financial irresponsibility. The reasons were comfortable discussing. I became homeless because I refused to accept emotional abuse from family members who saw my age as weakness and my dependence as an opportunity for control. I could see Vivian at the head table, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. She couldn't stop me without causing exactly the kind of scene that would destroy her reputation, but she couldn't let me continue without that same reputation being destroyed by the truth. Last March, I was living with my daughter's family, helping with household tasks and caring for my grandsons. I cooked, cleaned, did laundry, and provided childcare, contributing significantly to the household while asking for nothing more than basic respect and dignity. The audience was completely silent now, sensing that this wasn't going to be a typical feel-good story about elder care champions. But one person in that household didn't see my contributions as valuable. She saw them as inadequate. She subjected me to monthly, quote, inspections of my cleaning, criticized my cooking, and gradually convinced my daughter that I was a burden rather than a blessing. I paused and looked directly at Vivian, whose silver gown suddenly seemed less elegant and more like armor that wasn't protecting her. The final confrontation came when I was ordered to re-scrub an already spotless bathroom to appease this person's impossible standards. When I refused, when I said that I was a 70-year-old woman deserving of basic human dignity, not a servant to be commanded, I was given an ultimatum. Dr. Graves was writing furiously in her notebook. Eleanor's phone continued recording. Rebecca sat at our table with tears streaming down her face, but her posture was straight, and her eyes were fixed on me with something that looked like pride. My daughter, I continued, my voice never wavering, was forced to choose between her mother's dignity and her mother-in-law's approval. She chose approval. I was thrown out of the house I had helped purchase, cut off from the grandsons I adored, and told that I was no longer welcome in the family I had spent 70 years building and nurturing. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. These were people who prided themselves on supporting elder care, who wrote checks to organizations dedicated to protecting vulnerable elderly people. And I was describing a situation that had happened in their own community, perpetrated by someone they had honored and celebrated. "But here's what I learned during my 6 months of homelessness," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I learned that dignity isn't something other people can give you or take away from you. It's something you choose to maintain regardless of how others treat you. I learned that surviving abuse doesn't make you a victim. It makes you a survivor. And I learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is tell the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable for people who would prefer to maintain comfortable illusions." I paused and let my eyes sweep across the audience, taking in the stunned faces of Seattle's philanthropic elite. I'm telling you this story not for sympathy but for accountability. Because in this room tonight, there are people who talk beautifully about honoring our elders, while practicing cruelty toward the elderly people in their own families. There are people who donate money to elder care organizations while systematically destroying the dignity and self-worth of elderly family members. Vivian started to stand, her face flushed with rage and humiliation, but the mayor's wife placed a restraining hand on her arm. Creating a scene now would only make things worse. And there are people, I continued, looking directly at Rebecca, who have been trapped by fear into making choices they know are wrong, who have sacrificed their own moral compass to maintain financial security. Rebecca stood up from our table, her movement visible to everyone in the ballroom. In a voice that shook but carried clearly, she said, "The person my mother is describing is me. The gasp that went through the audience was audible. Rebecca walked slowly toward the podium, her children and husband watching with expressions of love and support. "My name is Rebecca Morrison," she said as she reached the microphone. "Catherine Miller is my mother, and everything she just told you is true." Vivian's composure finally cracked completely. She pushed back from the head table, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the silent ballroom. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice carrying without the microphone. "This is a coordinated attack on my family's reputation by a bitter, vindictive woman who couldn't accept reasonable household expectations." But Dr. Graves was already standing, her credentials as an expert in elder abuse lending weight to her words. "Mrs. Thornfield," she said clearly, "what Mrs. Miller has described represents textbook elder abuse, psychological manipulation, financial exploitation, and systematic degradation of an elderly person's dignity and self-worth. The fact that these behaviors occurred within a family setting doesn't make them less serious. If anything, it makes them more reprehensible." Eleanor stood next, her position in Seattle's social hierarchy giving her words additional impact. "Vivian, many of us have watched your treatment of family members over the years and wondered about the disconnect between your public persona and your private behavior. Tonight, we have our answer." One by one, other people in the ballroom began standing. Not everyone. Some remained seated, uncomfortable with the confrontation, or loyal to Vivian's money and influence. But enough stood that the message was clear. The community that had celebrated Vivian Thornfield as a champion of elder care was horrified to learn how she actually treated elderly people. "Mom," Rebecca said from the podium, her voice growing stronger, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a public acknowledgement that what I did was wrong, cruel, and completely contrary to everything you taught me about family loyalty and human dignity." She turned to face the audience, no longer the terrified woman who had thrown her mother out to appease her mother-in-law. "For months I told myself that I was protecting my children by maintaining financial security. But what I was really doing was teaching them that love is conditional, that family loyalty can be bought and sold, and that it's acceptable to abuse people who depend on you if it serves your interests." Marcus had joined Tyler and Jake at the edge of the stage, all three of them looking up at Rebecca with expressions of love and admiration. Whatever happened next, she had chosen courage over comfort, truth over convenience. "Mrs. Thornfield," Rebecca continued, looking directly at Vivian, "your financial support came with a price that was too high. You asked me to sacrifice my relationship with my mother, to treat the woman who raised me like hired help, to choose money over love. I did what you asked, and it nearly destroyed my family." She paused, then delivered the words that would end Vivian's control forever. "As of tonight, we no longer need or want your money. We would rather be poor and free than comfortable and trapped. We would rather struggle financially than compromise morally. And we would rather rebuild our relationships based on love than maintain them based on fear." The applause that followed was thunderous, led by Dr. Graves and Eleanor, but quickly spreading throughout the ballroom. These people understood what they were witnessing: a family choosing integrity over convenience, love over money, truth over comfortable lies. Vivian Thornfield, the woman who had built her reputation on caring for elders while systematically abusing an elderly family member, found herself standing alone at the head table as the community she had tried to impress celebrated her humiliation. She gathered her purse and fled the ballroom, her silver gown trailing behind her like the remnants of a shattered reputation. But I barely noticed her departure. My attention was focused on Tyler and Jake, who had climbed onto the stage and were running toward me with their arms outstretched. "Grandma Cat!" Tyler shouted, launching himself into my arms. "Are you coming home now?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, holding both boys close while Rebecca and Marcus joined our embrace. "Grandma Cat is coming home." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, business cards from reporters who wanted to interview me, and conversations with social workers who wanted to use my story to educate other families about elder abuse. Dr. Graves presented me with information about speaking opportunities at conferences and universities, ways to turn my experience into education for others. But the most important conversation happened in the hotel parking lot, as my family prepared to leave together for the first time in 6 months. "Mom," Rebecca said, "I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough. I know that what I did to you was unforgivable." "It was unforgivable," I agreed. "But that doesn't mean it can't be forgiven." "You made a terrible choice, Rebecca. But tonight, you made a brave one. You chose truth over comfort, family over money, love over fear." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Vivian meant what she said about cutting off financial support. "We'll lose the house, the boys' private school, everything." "Everything except what matters most," I replied. "You'll keep your integrity, your family's love, and your children's respect. The rest we can rebuild together." Tyler looked up at me with the wisdom that children sometimes possess. "Grandma Cat, does this mean families should always choose love over money?" "Always, sweetheart. Because money can be lost and earned again, but once you trade away love and dignity, they're much harder to get back." 6 months later, I'm writing this story from the kitchen table of a modest rental house where 4 generations of my family live together in harmony. Rebecca works as a social worker now, helping other families navigate the complex dynamics of elder care. Marcus continues teaching, though at a public university where his integrity matters more than his family connections. Tyler and Jake attend public school, where they've learned that their worth isn't measured by their possessions but by their character. They help with household chores not because they're forced to, but because they understand that families work together to support each other. And me? I've become something I never expected at 70 years old. An advocate. I speak at conferences about elder abuse, work with families struggling with similar dynamics, and teach others that age is not weakness. It's wisdom earned through decades of surviving life's challenges. The legal consequences for Vivian were swift and public. Dr. Graves's research, combined with my testimony and that of other families who came forward after the gala, resulted in investigations into the Thornfield Foundation's practices and Vivian's treatment of elderly family members. She was removed from several charitable boards and lost much of her social standing in Seattle's philanthropic community. More importantly, her power to destroy families was broken. Without the ability to use financial control to manipulate relationships, she became what she had always been underneath the expensive clothes and charitable donations, a bitter, controlling woman whose own fear of irrelevance had led her to systematically destroy the people who should have been her greatest source of joy. But this story isn't really about Vivian Thornfield. It's about the choice every family faces when dealing with elderly members. Will you see them as burdens to be managed or blessings to be cherished? Will you use their vulnerability as an opportunity for control or as a chance to demonstrate love? It's about the courage required to choose dignity over convenience, integrity over financial security, love over fear. And it's about the truth that I learned at 70 years old and want to share with everyone who hears this story. You are never too old to stand up for yourself. You are never too dependent to demand respect. You are never too vulnerable to insist on dignity. Family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. It's about the people who choose to love you, not despite your weaknesses, but because of your humanity. It's about choosing each other again and again, especially when that choice requires sacrifice. Today, as I watch Tyler and Jake playing in our small backyard, as I help Rebecca prepare dinner while Marcus grades papers at the kitchen table, I know that we made the right choice. We chose love over money, truth over comfort, dignity over convenience. And we discovered that a family built on those foundations is strong enough to survive anything. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, whether you're the elderly person being mistreated, the family member trapped by fear, or even the person using control to manage relationships, remember this: it's never too late to choose differently. It's never too late to choose love. The family you save might be your own. Now, I'm curious about all of you who've listened to my story. What would you have done in Rebecca's position? Have you ever had to choose between financial security and family loyalty? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what country you're watching from so I can see how far this message about dignity and family love has traveled. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that a 70-year-old woman's dignity matters. And thank you for understanding that sometimes the most important battles we fight are not for ourselves, but for the children who are watching and learning what kind of adults they want to become. Remember, you are worthy of love, you are deserving of respect, and you are never too old to remind the world of your worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.